Luke B, welcome back, buddy.
Thanks.
A little more on the clutch talk there, bud, if you want to just jump right into it.
I took some heat, Luke, since that time about our clutch conversations.
That was
From
from
who?
him.
Slush
I never
box
said
guys.
nothing.
It wasn't me.
Sure.
Baby, you give me ice and fire. You're giving me wind and rain.
So you got a green screen. You hoping to travel this podcast anywhere?
No, you told me to get a green screen. Yeah, where am I going?
Yeah, he's going somewhere.
So last time we had you on, we did a little bit of background on who you were, but I know you want to dive in to the juiciness
Oh, boy.
of camshafts.
Yeah, because we only kind of just skimmed the surface of it last time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, eh? You know what?
Restart.
Okay, how about this? Why are camshafts even important? Why we just jam this rod into the center of the block? Like, what do they even do?
Well, that's what like 75% of the people out there do.
Do we have to go that
Yeah.
basic, or...
No, it's a good question, though, honestly. Yeah, why is the camshaft such an important part selection?
Yeah.
Why can't I just order part numbers off the shelf and get
Why
the
do
most
we
out of
gotta
it every
degree
time?
the cam? Like, what is that thing doing? Why does it seem like it's the brains of the whole operation?
I mean, that's, I guess, a good way of putting it. It is the brains of the operation. I mean, the engine is an air pump, right? So air in, air out. But how and when is it moving that air is going to completely dictate on when and where it's making power, where the RPMs are going to go to, how to complement a power adder. That's a very basic question, but it's a very, like, a question that will go, like, over a lot of people's heads, like, almost instantly if you, like, really want to get into it. But the biggest mistake that I feel like everybody makes is thinking that bigger is always better. So these guys out there with these like 8.5, 9-to-1 compression Chevy engines, like small block Chevy, just because it's so common, they want something big and crazy. So they buy a 600 lift cam and got 240 degrees of duration at 50, and thing won't get out of its own way until it's at like 4,000 RPM. Because you've made no cylinder pressure. You could probably take a cam that's like 219, 225 at 50, and it might not make as much peak power, but it'll probably make more power average for the RPM band that an engine like that is actually efficient at.
Right.
In the world of less is more or more is better, why do these guys just have one cam versus those engines that have like 5 cams in them?
They have more valves.
Yeah.
So it just has that main one. That's the
bunch of
heart of
push
it,
rods.
and then we got a couple more on top. That's just...
Yeah, so small block Chevy is cam in the center with push rods, rockers.
Yeah.
So it's like a V, it's pushing down. And then if you have something with overhead cams, like the new Fords or
Coyote.
whatever,
Ford engine, yeah,
Yeah.
Coyote.
then those cams are actually sitting on top of the valves, and the cam lobe is pushing the valve down, so it doesn't have push rods. So then you have a timing chain that goes up and around.
So you wouldn't want that in a race engine?
No, people would too.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it's
just
just-
the architecture we're
Technically, they're
given.
more efficient. Having something overhead valve, 2 camshafts, it really allows you to do a lot of weird things you couldn't do on a standard cam, especially with degreeing the cams, because you can degree the 2 different cams separately. But 9 times out of 10, the way they can place the valves in those heads just makes them way, way more efficient. They're better engines, but they're not as big usually, which is why you see that high power stuff like what Ryan has, or like big black Chevy stuff making so much power, because you can get 400 cubic inches out of it. I mean, a big Coyote is 330 cubic inch,
Yeah.
and that's like expensive big Coyote.
Yeah, it's not uncommon to see big blocks double that in size at the track.
easy.
So
Yeah, 632 is like a typical bracket motor now. It's crazy.
But yeah, it's actually an interesting question, Trev, because the just with having the central camshaft with push rods and rockers, it's like built-in constraints on your port design and how you can lay out the ports and the size of the ports, and like Luke's talking about, this really
Lobe
dictates
design
how big
too,
you
because
go.
the weight of the whole system plays into it.
Right.
When you have a follower and a cam and a valve, you have no system weight.
Absolutely. So then you have some constraints on how aggressively you're going to be able to open and close that thing, and even just controlling the valve events, I suppose, too. So, yeah, it's certainly a lot of advantage with an overhead cam if we're, if the rest of the architecture can support also, I guess, building a big badass race motor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why you'll see stuff like that need to do so much RPM to make power. They just don't have the cubic inch.
I see.
But they're capable of the RPM is the other side of it. I mean, Coyote can do 9,000 RPM without blinking an eye a lot of times on stock parts. In order to do 9,000 RPM with a small block Chevy or an LS or something like that, you're putting some time into it.
Consideration too. Have you worked with much of this sort of thing, Luke? Like this is outside of my wheelhouse, overhead cam stuff personally, but
Not a lot. A lot of the 4.6 mod motor stuff is primarily where I have experience in, just because that's most of the phone calls that I get for that. We don't do anything for Coyote, and honestly, Coyotes don't really need cams. I mean, stock cams in those cars have gone EP.7s, so not broke, don't fix it.
that's surprising. I didn't know that. So a lot of the quick Coyote stuff I'm seeing, it's like stock camshafts a lot of the time.
Pretty much stock, like stock rotating assembly. They'll put oil pump drive gears in them and lock out the cams. But I mean, they'll make 1,000 horsepower on a later generation Coyote. They'll make 1,000 horsepower. They don't care. They just keep going.
That's the beauty of turbos.
Yeah.
Boosts
Yeah.
doesn't care about a lot of things I found. Versus back in the day when you're all out NA trying to do stuff. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
So
NA sucks.
yeah. So let's pretend Trevor buys a pickup truck, wants a camshaft from Howard Cams, calls you. He's got a big block Chevy in it. He says, "What's the best cam for a big block Chevy NA?" That's all the information you need. You just pull it off the shelf, right?
Yeah, people like that, I generally give them an RV cam, because the conversations usually go one of two ways. Either they don't know what they have, or they don't know how to explain what they have. So if somebody calls like that, I'll ask them, okay, well, what's the compression ratio? Is it a stock bottom end? What cylinder heads are on it? What do you plan on using this engine for? But if somebody calls and says, what's the best NA cam for a big block Chevy, usually the route that's going is they're wanting the bottom of the page camshaft. So they're looking at their list of camshafts that's on Summit, and they're looking at this one down here because it's got the biggest specs. But in reality, they're probably wanting something up in the upper third to get it to work correctly. But yeah, I mean, ideally we want cylinder head specs, valve size, bore and stroke is important, tire size, gear ratio, what transmission's in the car. If it's a stick shift, a lot of times I'll want to know what first gear ratio is. Weight of the vehicle is important. So, I mean, if you want the camshaft that's best for your application, you really have to have everything in order before you call a cam company.
Yeah, I don't think it's news to us. We joke about this question because it's one of those things where it's a simple question. When Trev asks and calls you up, he's like, give me the best cam for my big block. But it really depends on so much stuff and on the context. Like you said, the use case too. So it's a kind of a question we joke about. But
yeah, the other call that we get is, I want, what's the best cam, or I need the biggest cam.
Yeah, hell yeah.
Yeah, when everybody thinks big cam, they're thinking lift numbers, which lift numbers are almost irrelevant. On an NA motor, yes, they're important. Boost stuff, the thing does not.
You could talk about mine if you want, because we ran into that where my heads flow up to 1,000, 900 to 1,000 lifter. I actually felt like that too. I was wondering why we wouldn't just max out the lift, because the heads can flow it.
Mid-lift numbers are just as important as the high lift numbers. So there's a lot of times people will call, and let's just use a 185 CC head, for example, they'll say, well, I'm thinking I have these heads, but I don't know. Everybody says these heads are way better. So, like an off-the-shelf AFR Enforcer, if you look at their mid-lift flow numbers, they're kind of okay. I mean, they're linear. But then if you look at, and that's a 195 head, 190 head. And then if you look at like a head like a Brodex IK 180, they're making the same flow numbers at like half the lift. So that just means that the air in the end, the air that the engine's requiring is getting introduced that much sooner into the air charge. So you have the potential for basically getting that much more air into the engine, or desired amount of air into the engine, instead of having this peak number where you have like the 300 CFM that your engine needs to get, and then this like 30 thou of lift of like quick trying to get it in. So you can make a more efficient engine with a cylinder head that flows more with less lift, and then not have to put something that has 700 lift to get your numbers out of.
Makes sense though, Luke, because you're only at peak lift numbers for a fraction of that cycle, right? You're spending way more time
You're everywhere
at
else
the mid lift numbers.
longer.
Yeah. So
Yeah, so like for your heads, for example, like they flowed all the way up to 1,000. They continued to gain, but if you look at the mid lift numbers, the jumps in between, like I think your sheet was going up by every 100. The lower numbers were taking massive jumps every 100, and then once we started getting above the 800, it was like 10 or 15 CFM. Like it wasn't
huge.
drastic. Yeah, and what that shows is basically it's not a direct correlation, but it's a pretty good idea of what velocity and the port's doing. So if velocity is what makes horsepower, so yes, the engine needs a certain amount of CFM, but if there's no velocity in the port, it's not getting that air. It has the opportunity to get it, but it's not getting it. So you want airspeed to stay high in the port. That's more of like a cylinder head guy thing. I just take that information and basically put it into a cam to get the desired horsepower and RPM range that we're looking for. So on your engine, being that it's boosted, the lift numbers are less consequential just because of the fact that, yes, they flow X amount of CFM, but density of the charge matters more than the actual cubic feet per minute going into your engine. So if we ever run into an issue, it's like James Foley. It's not something that I'm necessarily worried about, because theoretically, if we put more lift in the engine and allowed more CFM to go in, it would just decrease your boost number. So it would be making the same horsepower theoretically. So you're just looking at a higher CFM with a lower density charge, or a lower CFM number going through the ports with a higher density charge. So theoretically, the same amount of air is still there.
plus then you get the advantage of not necessarily having to push that valve so far. The lift number comes down. Maybe be a little more, gentle on the Valvetrain to some degree.
I won't be changing springs either. There's a nice crossover spot where you're changing springs all the time, or you're making horsepower and not doing maintenance all the time.
So did you guys actually alter your original cam to a different lift, or
no, my cam was bent, so
you're just getting the same grind?
no, Luke's doing
It's a little different. Not much. The big boy, the big cam for the other block, that one's different quite a bit.
That's
that one.
That's gonna be the rotate the earth cam.
Nice.
Yeah, that one, since we went to the bigger core, we had a lot more material and heat treat to work with, so I was able to really spread the lobe separation angle out, which is hypercritical on a lot of the boosted applications. But the more you can shrink down that overlap number, theoretically, the more boost you can trap inside the engine without that high density charged air seeping out the exhaust during that overlap event.
So in that situation then, Luke, if you're spreading out the lobe separation with the intention of maximizing air pressure in the cylinder, density of fill, are you having to also then change the actual lobes themselves to like a more aggressive ramp rate to still get your duration numbers? Like are the Brian's cams going to have different lobes now?
Yeah, there is a grind for the intake and a grind for the exhaust, like two different lobe categories.
Okay.
Yep.
Are you wondering lobe design versus the aluminum block versus the iron block cams, you mean?
Yeah, that too, yeah.
if one's more aggressive.
Sure.
Like the ramp rates between, like if we had the two cams beside each other, because the one's bigger, and you could go a little bit more aggressive if you can slow the ramp rate down on that because you have more lobe to work with. I think that's maybe.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, so
We're gonna need to put a lot of pictures up on this podcast.
right. A lot of that, unless somebody is really like this motor needs to make 2 or 3 passes and we're okay changing springs.
Mhm.
Like unless somebody's like looking at that, I'm not really looking to like put this super gnarly aggressive ramp rate on it. The stuff that I did for Brian is basically low closing velocities. So rip the valve open, hold it open as long as possible, and then when it gets to the seat, it's gently close it.
I don't know if that'll work because I usually do my valve jobs with my seats. It's bouncing off each other.
Not anymore.
Damn it. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and the other side of that too is that you're on a 1.7 rocker and a 1.65 rocker, so a lot of times a lobe is designed for a specific rocker ratio.
Mhm.
So if your lobe is set up to do a certain thing on a 1.5 rocker and it lifts the the rocker gently, or the push rod or the lifter gently off the seat on a 1.5, you put a 1.7 on it and you just increase that exponentially. So a lot of times where a lobe is like right on the edge of being unstable, you'll see that you start getting into spring instability in situations like that too. So there are more aggressive lobes in our catalog, but as far as what you're doing, Brian, and the amount of spring pressure, I really think that thing needs that. These are aggressive lobes for that to get the job done, but still maintain springs in it for like a season.
Yep.
Not having to worry about that stuff.
So some guys could actually get into issues with that. So say if they buy a camshaft and it's cut for 1.6 or 1.5 rockers, and then they're thinking, I'm at the point where I want to go faster, I'm going to put a 1.8 rocker on it, like a bigger rocker. They could actually decrease performance thinking they're going to make more, but just because of the valve spring getting out of control.
If it's an aggressive camshaft already, most companies shelf grinds, you'll never run into something like that. But if you're a budget guy like most of us are, and we're buying used camshafts and throwing them in our engines and trying to make stuff work, a lot of times these companies doing custom grinds will put something aggressive together for a specific pressure on a specific rocker ratio, and guys will go and just put that in because the duration numbers are roughly what they were looking for, but then bump lift numbers up because their cylinder heads needed something different or something like that. And yeah, you could get into an issue like that. You'll chatter the spring right off the seat, bounce the lifter.
If we keep using Brian's situation as a bit of a case study for the cam, Luke, are you guys also targeting a distance to coil bind at peak lift too?
Yeah, so that's like we've talked about pressures, Brian, but we really haven't gone into it completely. Generally, something like him, probably 50 to 80 thou to coil bind would be ideal. You can put stuff in, like what I hate seeing, and it's so common, is that in the LS engines, like people buy like the BTR 660 springs because they're the pimpin' dual spring package on the market right now, and then they put a cam in that's got 550 lift. Well, they're probably over 100 away from coil bind. If they're trying to get any sort of performance out of that engine, depending on how the entire combination's set up, they could actually be getting into areas where that spring is just continuously pulsating and not slowing down. As the coils and the spring get closer, they'll actually work as like a damping effect. So being closer to coil bind will actually benefit most engines.
Cool. Yeah, that's what I was hoping to get
That's
to.
kind of neat.
I've experienced that with mine. I actually run, I may or may not run with the spring kit you mentioned there, but I run it very tight, close to coil bind, and I have a lot more camshaft actually, I think, than they generally recommend it's for. But the reason I did that is just to run them super tight like that. And I've run the thing, 8,100 RPM every pass for years now on the same spring package. So that's what I attributed it to, but it's cool to hear it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that kit is just a pack spring. We sell the exact same spring. Yeah, I mean as long as you're in a spot with foil bind to make the spring work as the dampener that it actually is.
Mhm.
I mean it is there to hold the valve shut, but it is dampening a lot of the erratic things that are going on in the Valvetrain as well. Hey, yeah. So I saw another guy asked about the Vizard 128 formula.
Oh yeah, that was the other question we sent you too. Eh?
Yeah.
So
So
I'm not gonna lie. When I first started building small block Chevys, I bought the Building Small Block Chevys on a Budget David Vizard book. Yep.
yeah, David has a crazy amount of experience and has done very well for himself. He does a lot with us at Howards actually as well. Um, the one thing with Vizard is that the stuff that he's looking at is this spectrum here, and that's it, just right here.
Yep.
So once you get outside of that, odds are it's probably not going to work for your combination. So, for instance, the 128 formula. Let's say you're building a 540 big block Chevy. You're using the AFR 335 heads. So his formula has to do with cubic inch and valve size, and that dictates your lobe separation angle. So that AFR head has a 235 intake valve. So you do 540 cubic inch, 235 intake valve. That math puts you on like a 101 or a 102 lobe separation angle. I would never spec anyone with a 540 with a lobe separation angle like that. I don't think I'd ever even spec a lobe separation angle like that. And then to follow that out, it would put that thing on, to do the rest of the math for that formula, it would put it on like a 317 duration, which isn't entirely far off, but advertised duration is not going to tell you as much as 50 duration. So I can look through our lobe catalog at 317 duration lobes that I have, and we'll probably have 6 or 7 different 50 numbers for various different lobes. Duration at 50 is going to mean a lot more than anything else. So 540 with those heads, I'd probably be something that's probably going to come out to like a 30, like something low 300s as far as duration goes, like advertised duration, and then probably something like 270s at 50. So his cam would be small on lobe separation angle and big on duration. So I'm sure there's combinations out there that it works perfectly on for like street small block stuff, but it's cylinder head technology has come so far. It will not work in a boosted application because you're looking at completely different things than you are for an NA application. But I mean, he has his followers out there, and
I guess with a general rule like that, you can get a good running engine, but you're not going to maximize the performance of anything with a general rule, because every combo is going to be a little bit different and a different use case. So
Do you figure that all out by the bore and stroke? Is that how you figure out which size heads, what type of valves to get in there?
you'd likely start there.
And then go cam?
Thinking of it as an air pump, and then you're trying to pump as much air into that cylinder efficiently.
So you start from the block,
So
basically?
You're usually starting from the size of the pump, and then
Right.
yeah, size of the pump, and then from there, kind of look at both of them, especially if you're considering compression ratio, because sometimes you'll be really limited on a head as far as what you can do as far as compression ratio, because that'll dictate the piston. But yeah, general cubic inch area, required CFM, and then the camshaft just basically takes all the pieces that you've put together and puts it in the area that you want it.
Right.
Luke, can we backtrack for 1 sec? I just wanted to clarify something maybe for those that might not be as familiar. We've been talking about duration at 50, but can you explain a little bit what duration at 50 means?
At 50 means, yeah. So advertised duration, a lot of times referred seat to seat duration. So the degrees of crankshaft rotation, the valve is actually coming off of the cylinder head and then closing again. Realistically, most companies are doing that at like 6, like 006. So basically, as soon as they're seeing movement, they record that measurement and go from there. Just because at what point is the valve actually really starting to move off the head is kind of the hard part to figure out, especially with like a micrometer or a dial gauge. So 6 is generally the industry standard for like an advertised duration, and then at 50 thousandths of tappet lift is where the next duration is recorded at, and that's that F50 number that everybody talks about.
Okay. So basically the lifter's getting further up the lobe for that measurement, and that one tends to be better for comparison between camshafts or profiles.
Right, yeah, because like for instance, like a factory camshaft, GM hot cams, everybody knows about GM hot cams. So they were 219, 225 at 50. But everybody says they're crappy, they're old technology, and then we sell a GM hot cam. And no, we don't really sell a lot of it because there's so much information out there on how it's a bad cam. Back in the day, it was a very lazy cam because it had a lot of advertised duration. Ours is about 20 numbers smaller advertised than that cam. But the 50 numbers are the same, which a lot of people are looking at just 50 numbers, which is great because it'll tell you like a general area of how a camshaft works. But if you're opening and closing that valve quicker, it's going to help in like responsiveness of the engine and overall feel of how everything's driving. Will make it seem as lazy. But GM did that back in the day just because it was a very gentle cam that would survive forever and not damage parts.
Right. Important considerations, different applications. You have any other questions about that, Brian?
I'm not gonna lie, I usually just call my cam guy and say, cut me a cam. Be that guy that's like, you know what? Can we get a little more on that duration? And then Luke would be like, shut up, Brian. That's what you're getting.
I told them already that if the new cams don't do what we want them to, we're going smaller, which seems like a complete wrong way that you'd want to do things, but it just means that it was already too big. I don't think that's going to be the case given everything else that I've seen in that engine. So
I'll just have to bring up the rest of the parts to where the cam works good. You just tell me you want more boost, you want more bore, you know, better
More
heads.
RPM.
Yeah. What else did we have on that list?
We're going to check if there's any final questions, Luke. But I do have one more in the meantime here, because we did touch on it a little bit earlier. You mentioned compression and compression ratio when it comes to the camshaft conversation. Obviously, or I'm assuming that you're referring to static compression at that point, but can you speak to the difference between static compression when it comes to picking the camshaft, and then maybe how that plays out with like dynamic compression once you actually have a spinning engine?
Yeah, so if somebody calls me and asks me about dynamic compression, I will immediately divert the conversation. Mainly because if you hop online and say, Google dynamic compression ratio calculator, take the first 4 calculators and do the same engine on every single one. You will get 4 different numbers. So unless you're doing like combustion pressure analysis or can actually put the engine on on a gauge and see what your cranking compression actually is, those numbers are just guesses. They're just complete and total guesses at what that engine's capable of doing as far as cranking compression. So I only really look at static, and then I know what duration at 50 roughly is okay with a certain static compression ratio. So EFI and coil packs completely throw all that out the window because you can do so much with timing and so much with basically field distribution that it really doesn't matter. I mean, like back to Coyotes, new Coyotes are, I think they're like 11.5 or 12 to 1 factory. They're ridiculous. You can run it on 87 octane. So that just goes to show you what modern fuel injection can do. But if you take something like that and put the size camshaft that's in a Coyote for like duration numbers and put it in a small block Chevy with a carburetor, it is not going to work. Does not have enough timing sweep. Fuel atomization isn't, or fuel distribution is not going to be completely correct. That's why you see like small block stuff like that. 4 corners are always hot as far as like spark plugs and timing goes. So I get so many people that are building these engines and they're 11.5 to 1, and then they want the thing to drive from 1,500 to 5,000. And my response is good luck every single time. Because something 11.5 to 1 on a carburetor is going to want to be like 235, 240 at 50 minimum, just so it can drive on pump fuel. So guys overlook that drastically. So back to like where like you're looking at your engine from starting a project and you're picking your cylinder heads. The other side of that is to know what you want your desired RPM range to be, and the compression ratio needs to be an outcome based on what your RPM range is going to be versus the fuel you're going to run versus etc. Because realistically, most of these guys, they're going to want something that's comes on about 1500 to 1800 RPMs, and they're like, say, 400 cubic inch Chevy. That's going to be something like 225, 230 at 50. 400 cubic inch, it would work fine with 2000, 2200 converter, so very, very, very drivable combination. But something like that's going to need to be 10 to 1, 7.5 to 1 at most.
Awesome. Luke, do you like Hemis?
I have one.
Cool. Okay.
You want to sell it? Brian needs motor.
No, he's talking about a street car.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's not his, it's his wife's.
Ooh.
Mine.
Who drives it? Who dailies it, Luke?
Not me.
I gotta ask the cam guy if he can make a tool steel flat tappet cam with tool steel lifters perform as well as a solid roller. This sounds like a dirt track
Like
question.
a class limited kind of situation.
The answer would be no. Simply just because of the way the lifter rides on the load. You can only do so much. So ramp rate on a flat tappet is a direct correlation. There's literally a formula to figure it out. So you can put so much ramp rate in a camshaft based on the diameter of the lifter. So most Chevy guys are going to be limited completely and totally by the fact that they have an 842 lifter. They can go to like the 903 or 904 Chrysler style stuff. But at that point, you're still limited to the fact that you have a flat face lifter. When the cam is seeing every inch, where the lifter is seeing every inch of the cam lobe up and around, you can do much different things with it and make them much more aggressive. If they're doing tool steel on tool steel, to hope to not have problems, the other side of that is the tool steel's not going to fix your problems. So that's a good thing I can talk about, actually. So I don't know if you guys do any flat tappet stuff at all, but in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of issues with a lot of flat tappet stuff going flat. And everybody thinks it's cams, everybody thinks it's the lifters. So straight from the cam guy's mouth, it is the lifters. So there are companies out there buying offshore parts, and they're not working out. So the problem is that lifters, flat tappet lifters, are measured based on like a Rockwell hardness level, and if you Rockwell test these lifters, they'll come out fine. So industry standard for OEM was like a 55 RC, somewhere in there. Our stuff, usually the bottom end stuff, will come in around 59 and above. So these offshore lifters are coming in at like 60 plus, which is not bad. You'll be like, oh man, they're hard, they're great, they shouldn't go flat. The problem is that there's actually deposits and formations of carbide on the flat face of the lifter. So as that lifter's turning and spinning on the cam, the carbides are what we're relying on to basically keep that cam from not going flat and keep the lifter from misshaping. And there is little to no deposits of the carbides. It's a complete metallurgy problem. Just from the start, the metal is not made correctly.
As a cam guy who supplies lifters also, is it more of a depending on brand lifter? Like your lifters still don't, like your lifters aren't failing either?
2021, we had to get some stuff just to keep things moving up in and off the shelf. But now we are completely and totally back to Johnson High Lift lifters, which are American-made company. Johnson's who supplied all the OEMs when all the OEMs flat tappet, so we rely on them for our information. They've had their own issues, but we seem like we're doing miles and miles better than a lot of these other companies are.
So it comes down to buying Howards cams.
If you want flat tappet, buy a Howards. Yeah,
There you go.
yeah.
How much flat tappet stuff do you still do? There's still got to be a market for it, but I can imagine most stuff's
kind of crazy. It's probably more than a roller.
It is,
Small
eh?
block Chevy flat taps. That's probably most of the phone calls that I get.
Wow, that's surprising to me.
Guys are cheap. You can get cam and lifter set for $260.
Well,
Really?
me and Trevor were talking about it too today about like the stuff that we actually do isn't like top of the line stuff, but I do feel like we are farther ahead of most of like just the hot rodders.
Whether we're farther ahead, we're more extreme.
Not farther ahead. I feel like the demographic of people aren't doing what we're doing still. Most
Right.
of them are just doing the old school hot rodder.
Stuff that makes 350 horsepower is 90% of what we do.
Sit it on the jack stand for 45 minutes and break a cam in.
Yeah,
When
yeah.
If I was buying a cam, I'd just want it for the grunt. Like, I just like the sound,
another
right?
thing.
Trev wants
So
to chop. He wants a choppy
Yeah.
cam.
Fucking right.
Everybody wants the chop, but they don't realize what the chop sacrifices. So if you have the chop, you don't have the vacuum. If you don't have the vacuum, you don't have the brakes, which is an issue for a lot of people. So unless you want to put a vacuum canister in the car or convert to like manual brakes,
Or do some squats and get the
No.
brake pedal push.
Okay, you want the chop? I'll give everybody out there the chop. This is the easiest way to get it. Pull one spark plug wire off. Instant chop.
I'm gonna do that on my Ford Escape.
not wrong. Or you hop on HP tuners and just give it a 60-degree swing of timing.
Yeah.
Chop like a mofo.
Okay, so,
Yeah, I
so
had-
the
I
chop
had a
is
guy
bad
that,
for performance.
He didn't want a big cam, didn't want to sacrifice any like factory style performance, but he wanted to hear sound. So I put an RV cam in it and gave him a huge timing swing on HP tuners, and literally had to turn the misfire counter off at idle so it wouldn't think it was destroying itself. And chops like a mofo. It's
Hell yeah.
207, 213 at 50, so it's tiny, and it's on a 114 load separation. And the thing sounds like a mother thumper.
Nice.
It's hilarious.
Yeah, see, like, I don't go to the gym at 5 a.m. and do 140 miles an hour. I would just chop that baby all the way there. That's it. I'd have a following, probably. Sounds good, man. Like, Howards. Yeah.
Get with Luke. He'll hook
Yeah.
you up. So is there anything with cams that excites you that people don't know? Like maybe something that you're just like, this is the coolest thing.
The coolest thing about being a cam guy is being a part of everybody's stuff. Like when you're a garage mechanic just working on your own stuff and you have your own hot rod, you're part of one hot rod. But when you have customers sending you pictures over the weekend of like cool shit they're doing, like that's the best part about being a cam guy.
I don't know. I think you got a few more in there, Brando.
Okay,
What do
I
you
got,
got?
I got another
see,
one. All right, if he wants to poke and prod me.
Okay, so when you're doing base pressure on your clutches,
We're going to do a clutch episode, Luke, and we'll
We
get
can.
back for that. And these guys, they can stay home for that day. We'll just have our own little
no,
pod
Luke
here.
could come back every time. Okay, Brandon, you
All
got
right,
the floor.
Luke. Last question, then we'll get you out of here. We appreciate it. What I wanted to ask about, we were talking about lifters and on the flat tapping subject, and this is something I don't think gets talked about a ton because we're all either solid roller guys, hydraulic roller, but oil selection for something like this. Do you guys have general recommendation for which oils are still suitable for flat tappet stuff? Because my understanding is that the kind of quality's deteriorated over time, just because everything's gone to rollers.
Yeah, well, the quality, I guess, hasn't necessarily deteriorated, but there's so many detergents in oils now that the zinc in the oil is very important for a flat tappet. And then when you have a component of the oil that its job is literally to wash everything clean, detergent, when you're relying on a zinc to stay on a surface, having a detergent oil is completely counterintuitive to what you actually want to happen. So a non-detergent oil and then a zinc additive is a must. So that literally puts you on a strict racing oil. I mean, Valvetrain BR1 is what a lot of people use, and that's even got detergents in it. Not saying that it won't work, but you need to be conscious of that. So the only thing that we really recommend, if somebody says, what oil should I use? Maxima racing oils. So when all of our stuff was tested, that's what we used to test it. our additives are all made by Maxima.
Yeah, I used to run VR1, but I've been on the Lucas kick now.
Yeah. I mean, that's that for you guys, you're rollers, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do keep it in mind with mine because I run a stock LS rocker, so I still don't have a roller tip on that. So that's my kind of metal to metal point, sliding surface point there.
Yeah. Not a huge deal for that. You have aluminum rocker and steel valve tip, right? So, or the factory LS rockers.
There's steel on steel. It's a cast steel rocker.
At least you got a hardened tip.
Does have a hardened tip. I've been good. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Usually my only metal on metal is my rod bearings.
Nice. All right, Luke. I think that's all I got for you. So sweet. Appreciate
Fuck,
it.
you went easy on him, eh?
Trevor, you still got time.
I am
Bring up
not an
busters.
engine guy. I don't know anything about the
Yeah.
stuff. I put a key in and it works good.
Well, Trevor, Trevor did ask about degree in the cam though. If there's anything for like, we could keep this one like
That's basically just timing the cam
semi basic for people.
to
Like I was just thinking more like cause and effect.
Yeah, it all spins in the same thing, but when you degree your cam, what is the overall, like, it's a step you have to do. Why are we doing this?
Yeah,
well, in the first,
basically you're just checking tolerances in the engine. So if you want to make sure that the valve pin and the cam is in the correct place, you want to make sure that the keyway and the crank is in the correct place.
Right.
All you're doing to verify that is using top dead center versus your
Number one cylinder has to be top dead? Before you start doing
top
all
dead
that?
center number one versus intake center line of camshaft.
So say you cut somebody a cam and it's 112 lobe center, and your cam card says install it at, we'll just say easy 112. I have seen stuff where they tell you to install it in a different spot. So say you put it at 112. You verify everything's good, your timing set's good by doing that. Do you ever go further and recommend, say like, they take it, they make horsepower, blah, blah. Is there ever a time that you say, you know what, try installing it at 114 or try installing it at 110? Like, would there ever be a reason why you would try and do something like that?
Yeah. Usually, like small block boosted combinations, like turbo stuff, you'll do something that's like 230 or 240 at 50, so relatively small cams. On a 114, we'll have them put in that stuff on like 112s. Basically, with that, you're just shifting that whole RPM range up further. So, retarding the cam will take off the bottom and add to the top. Advancing the cam is going to take off the top and add on the bottom. So, like our circle track stuff, most of our circle track stuff is going to be like a 108 or a 106 or a 108 lobe separation angle, which are going to be on 102 or 104 intake center lines. 90% of those guys, we have them installed on a 98, just so moving that peak torque band down to like wherever their RPM is coming out of the corner, so they're right on top of that peak power when they're coming out of the corner. It takes some. If you're really looking to optimize moving the cam around, you really need some data to do it. It's not just something you guess at, but 9 times out of 10 in a circle track car will advance the hell out of them.
Yeah, we got to put a disclaimer now. Don't advance your cam without checking piston to valve clearance.
Yeah,
because
that's another.
You're tag all your valves now.
yeah. My engine actually, it's in retarded to get piston to valve clearance.
Okay. Yeah, usually when I first set up my motor, like if I get a new cam, I'll install it, I'll degree it, and then I'll also degree it like for advanced, for retarded, just to make sure I have the swing if I ever do have to move it. But same thing, I don't have enough data or things written down that I could go back.
Something that makes 2,000 horsepower and boosted, it's moving the cam's not going to do enough to really quantify anything. You'll just move the booster around.
Right. But something like mine at 1,000 might be better.
I'm just kidding. You don't have to ask anything. I was just saying that just for just to hear my voice in my headphones.
It was good though, Luke. We appreciate you coming back again too.
No
Get
problem.
more tech, so thanks.
Yeah.
It was good.
Maybe next time we'll get you back on some more Howard stuff because
You still have questions?
Sponsored by Howards.
Brian's a big Howards
Yeah.
shell.
Yeah, all that stuff left the building on Friday.
Yeah.
Ooh, there we go. Cool. We'll do an unboxing video or something. I want to see this stuff too.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yep.
That would actually be really good.
Square-shaped globes.
Yep. Yeah, the big
All
round,
in.
the old round nose. All right, sweet. Thanks, Luke.
Thank you, Luke.
Love you,
We're gonna
Luke.
clap it out here.
Let's do it. That's it? One each?
It was cutting.
my
Yeah,
God. It cuts
Zoom
it out.
cut
Oh.
Zoom doesn't like that.
So, Luke, we want to talk camshaft. We want to talk tech a little bit. I know Brian has a couple questions. We talked to some guys we got, but I don't know if you had any idea on how you like to work through it. I have some questions because I'm kind of curious, like from like a case study standpoint. When someone comes to you or to Howards, or you got a spec a camshaft for
Fucking
what
knew it
is
was
that?
coming back
You
with a
knew it.
vengeance, man.
Jesus Christ.
Brandon took the biggest dump like 4 seconds ago and fragged that toilet up. Can you hear that? The pipes are about to blow.
He's gonna blow, boys.
Jesus Christ!